I'm joined today by Sarah Evans, Managing Director of Cardea Lettings. Am I saying that right, Sarah? Cardea?
Yeah.
Fabulous. A forward-thinking agency that prides itself on helping landlords stay compliant while delivering a great experience for their tenants. And today, obviously, we're going to talk about being renters right ready. The few things that we're going to cover is how letting agents like Cardea Lettings are preparing for the Renters' Rights Bill, the biggest challenges for agents and landlords right now, and how to navigate compliance while growing a successful business, and what you can do to stay ahead of the changes. So welcome, Sarah.
Thank you.
Let's crack on, shall we? So first thing I'd obviously want to talk to you about today is you and your journey and your agency. So if you could tell us a little bit about Cardea Lettings and the landlords and tenants you work with, and possibly for people that don't know you, whereabouts you are in the country, etc.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me, Zoe. So you might be able to tell from oh, I do it the wrong way every time. From the map, that's Oxfordshire. So I am based in Oxfordshire. So Cardea Lettings was born nearly 4 years ago. I've worked in property for many years, and was made redundant, so decided to start my own agency. And the idea behind it was to make sure that I'm transparent, and something that I was taught many years ago is about being reasonable. And I think that's something that's lacking in agency across the country. That transparency between landlords and tenants and the agent in the middle, and what fees they're charging and what they're offering and the services, and making sure that they provide those services. And one of my big core values is integrity. So that's something that I'm quite passionate about. And you might notice from the logo as well that I'm also a HMO specialist. So that's something that I heavily focus on, is HMOs in the Oxfordshire area. And you can probably see from the background as well, there's also a Charles David Casson banner there. So I probably should mention them. I am a franchisee of Charles David Casson, which is a sales side of the business. But yeah, Cardea is the lettings side.
Sounds like you're spinning a lot of plates there, Sarah. So
Always.
all this new legislation is probably a big challenge. Anyway, so we know the private rented sector, for God knows how many years I've been in it, is always getting battered with lots of change and lots of legislation. And obviously the thing that's on the horizon for all those agents now is this Renters' Rights Bill. So what do you think your biggest challenges are? Well, as agents, all of us, what do you think the biggest challenges are at the moment with everything that's coming over the hill towards us?
So I think the Renters' Rights Bill, obviously legislation is a huge thing. We've had a lot of legislation come in the last 20 years, from deposits to Deregulation Act to Section 21s, all the different things that we've had over the last 20 years, which have made the job much more regulatory. I think a lack of stock is a big issue at the moment for agents. You've got so many applications for every property. It can be quite heart-wrenching when you're speaking to some people and having to say no. So I think that's a big challenge for agents at the moment. And unrealistic expectations is the other thing I thought about. I think we have a big problem, not just with tenants, but with landlords as well, with their unrealistic expectations of either the rental value, because obviously there's been a lot of talk of rents going up so much recently, which they have. But I think some landlords are wanting really, really high rents for properties that aren't quite up to scratch. And again, I think tenants are expecting everything to be done for them like it's a bit of a hotel, and trying to have that balance between the two of, living in a tenant-like manner, but also landlords providing good quality, reasonable properties.
What do you think is fueling that then? Do you think, again, it's the media that's pressing this? Why do you think that it's because there's obviously seems to have been a shift from what you're saying, and it's getting increasingly worse. So do you think it's the media that's stoking that fire, or do you think it's just people just getting greedier? I mean, what do you think is causing it?
Bit of both. I think the media has had a big impact. The rhetoric for the last number of years has been landlords bad, tenants good, which I think is false. Yes, there are bad landlords out there, but they're in a minority. And again, there are bad tenants out there, but again, in a minority. And I think, a good percentage of the private rented sector is fair and reasonable on both sides. So the media portrayal is not great, and it doesn't help the situation. But also, I think societal changes over the last decade have made a huge difference in what people are expecting, because it's not just in rental properties, in employment, in life in general. Everybody wants to work from home but get paid £70,000 a year. So I think it's just a general society thing. I mean, do
you know any jobs like that at the moment? Because I am obviously, if the one came along.
I'd definitely take it. Yeah.
But he's running your own business, hands down, doesn't it? Anyway.
Yeah.
So obviously Renters' Rights Bill, we think we know it's coming. Rumor has it could be spring, could be autumn. They're keeping us guessing at the moment. Do you think, I mean, I know what my opinion is, but do you think agents and landlords are actually prepared for what's coming, or do you have the visions of the head in the sand sort of scenario, it'll all be fine, it'll all go away sort of thing?
Yeah, I certainly don't think that enough are prepared. I think there are some out there that are prepared, but I think the majority are asking the wrong questions to the wrong people, and not educating themselves on what the legislation is hoping to achieve and what's due to come in. And I think specifically agents as well are sort of hoping that they can just fly under the radar, and just not really have to do anything about it. I've seen quite a few asking questions that really they should know the answer to, which is
Yeah,
scary.
it is very scary. And I obviously see that. I'm obviously working with property mark as well. We bang the drum that getting qualified is the way forwards, and obviously being part of a trade, but professional body as well, to sort of protect yourself and wave that flag. So looking at the Renters' Rights Bill, then, what do you see as the biggest unknowns that agents and landlords need to be aware of? And I think maybe it's not necessarily something that's unknown, but maybe they're not focusing on. I know that having worked within the HMO sector for some time, and looking at the bill from that perspective, and my understanding is that enforcement is going to be ramped up, and it's going to cover a lot more. And I think, from my opinion, agents are focusing far too much on Section 21. But obviously, I'm not a practitioner anymore. So from your point of view, do you think that's true, or do you think there's other things that are flying under the radar per se that we're not preparing for?
I think probably the biggest unknown is the detail. So the devil is in the detail. And I think that's something that a lot of landlords and agents haven't looked at. So there's obviously guidance that, you see it in the media. So there's lots of media stories about some of the changes of the Section 21, and then the changes on rent controls and the changes on pets and all the other bits, the little bits that you see in the media. And I think a lot of both agents and landlords are reading that and taking that at face value, and not looking into the legislation itself and reading the details of that legislation and what actually that means. So like you've mentioned HMOs, and I think some landlords are panicking that, with a HMO that's on a room by room tenancy, they're, not going to be able to evict, and because they can only use like selling the property. Well, that would mean everybody would have to leave. And that's actually not the case. There are quite a few clauses under the Section 8 that they've added in that will help that. Again, with students, that's something else. There are obviously negatives to this, but there are things in the detail the media aren't portraying.
So obviously looking at it, and how what we've just discussed about the sort of unknowns, or the things that we're not quite sure about. As Cardea Lettings, how are you actually preparing for the inevitability of this? What changes are you already making in anticipation? I appreciate the devil's in the detail. We're not going to know the detail. But what we don't want to do as agencies get caught with our pants down, do we? If I can say that. What are you doing that might help other agents that are watching today at this stage? What can you do now? That's what I'm probably getting at.
I think for me, the number one thing I'm doing is educating myself and making sure that I'm keeping up to date on the legislation and all the changes. So where it is in the process, we're currently at committee stage in the House of Lords, and there's been some amendments that the House of Lords have brought in. So keeping myself up to date on what's happening there, and what the potential is for going forward. But also looking at things in my business, so my terms of business, my tenancy agreements, the processes that I have in the business, and whether those need to change, and how they can change. So I think something that I picked up on was the no rent in advance, which obviously was a new thing added a bit later on. But with no rent in advance, you can't take it prior to the signing of the tenancy agreement. It kind of needs to be done on the same day, which has a huge impact on agents' processes, because most of us will sign the tenancy agreement either at application stage, right at the beginning, and then the landlord signs it a couple of days before the actual tenancy starts, because we all do it electronically. Well, we're not all, but some of us do it electronically now. And that's something that's going to have to change. So definitely looking at processes and how they're going to have an impact with the changes in legislation. And I think if other agents need to also look at maybe attending one of the many webinars that there are at the minute, Good Lord are doing them, UKLA are doing them. There's lots of them out there that you can join, which will give you some real good insight into the legislation and how that's going to have an impact on your business.
Okay, so that's you. Landlords are obviously going to be doom scrolling and doing what landlords do. And maybe getting a lot of conflicting messages. We see it on a lot of social media groups that we're on. Sometimes you ask a question and get 5 different answers. So what are you doing with your landlords to reassure them and educate them? How are you getting that message through? Because obviously I remember, way back when, I can't remember. I mean, I sold the business 3 years ago, so it must be before that, when Section 21 was mooted that it was going to be gone. I had landlords serving notice and selling up then, years ago, so in panic mode. So what are you doing to sort of reassure them and say, hey, you may not need to do that?
Yeah, so far I've done a landlord event. So I did one last month, back into last month, which just went through the legislation as it stands, and how that can impact them and things that they might need to do or might need to look at. Making sure that they are looking at their tenancies and the properties that they've got. So doing a lot of landlord reviews to say, well, you're all right, or you're going to need to do this X, Y, and Z in order to remain compliant with the new legislation. I think one of the other things I was thinking about was, and I've written it down and I can't even see it now, I'm looking at it.
That's all right.
Yeah. Oh, social media, that was the other thing. See? Yeah, so a lot of posts on social media about the regulation changes, and trying to keep it accurate, I think is a big thing. And something that came out of the landlord event was when they were asking questions. If I don't know the answer, I don't know the answer. That's something that might need further work, or we don't know, as in the regulation doesn't know the answer to that. So I think it's keeping on top of that and making sure that landlords are aware of any new changes that come in.
Okay, and obviously another element of this bill is the focus it has on tenants' rights. So as an agent, how are you balancing compliance with maintaining good relationships between landlords and tenants?
I think it actually goes back to just the reason I set up the business, the transparency and communication, and understanding and having empathy with both sides, and trying to teach both sides the reasoning behind why things are done or why a tenant has an issue with something. I think something that's come out quite recently is a lot of landlords are trying to increase rents by a considerable amount of money, because once the regulation comes in and they have to go Section 13, and then they potentially might have to go to a tribunal, they're thinking, well, I'll do it now. But some of these landlords are trying to increase rent by £300-400 a month, which during a cost of living crisis, I mean, I don't have a spare £300-400 a month to add to my rent bill. So it's being really open with landlords and saying, look, that's just not reasonable. We need to communicate this well. Potentially you could do an increase of £50 now, and then maybe look at that again in another year. And I think it's having those conversations with both sides to make sure that, it's a good relationship between the two.
Yeah, I think it is all about communication in this game, isn't it? If you look at complaints, and I noticed there's an article out the other day about, I think it's a property redress scheme saying how complaints, and one of the key things there is always poor communication, isn't it? So it's getting that right, and obviously getting the right systems in place to communicate effectively. One of the things I've done with agents and as an agent myself is mapping journeys, and the pain points in the journey between the landlord and a tenant, and then acting on those pain points and looking at ways in which you could maybe do things a little bit differently to ease that pain. So so thanks for that.
I think something we don't do as agents is communicate well enough with our landlords when there isn't a problem.
No, one of the things I used to always instill on my team was, let's call them, not just for the bad stuff. And the first few times we did it, they'd be like, why are you ringing me? And then because what's gone wrong? Nothing's gone wrong, we just make sure you're okay. So it's, but again, it's about having the systems and the efficiencies in place to be able to have the time to do that and managing, because I know how it can be in an office where you're constantly firefighting. So it's getting that environment into a proactive place rather than a reactive place, which obviously
And you
can.
tend to find that if you're being proactive like that, you can actually resolve some of the reactive stuff in
Yeah,
advance.
it's
You know,
preventative,
so
isn't it?
rather than
Yeah,
landlords calling you and you getting 10 calls all at the same time saying, what the hell's happening with Section 21, for example,
yeah.
if you're speaking to your landlords on a regular basis,
Mm,
you can have that conversation with them. You know, have you got any concerns about the renters' rights
yeah.
bill? You know, what's your understanding of it? You know, being really open with them. And that communication is absolute key.
Yeah, I'm being a bit techie brain now as well. There are some great systems out there where you can set up like nurture campaigns. I know that's a bit of a buzz phrase, but it's good. We used to do one where we dropped something to our landlords once a week, just keeping them updated. So yeah,
Yeah.
there's lots of ways and means. So big sigh. The future of lettings. Are we all doomed? Or what way do you think the industry is heading right now? Do you think it's heading in the right direction? Are there areas that you think the bill maybe could improve? And the other thing to think about is there anything that you think people are getting wrong? So it's a two-part question. Is there any improvements there to make it a better place? And what one thing can you think of, like a myth or a misconception about this bill at the moment that's being touted around, that you might want to just sort of say, hang on a sec, that's a load of BS.
Yeah, there's too many of those. I wrote a very long list of all those myths and misconceptions about it at the moment. I think probably the number one for me is I can't evict my tenant with no Section 21. And I'm like, nope, that's not the case. You've always been able to evict tenants under Section 8 anyway. And I think that's a big thing that a lot of landlords who are newer to the game don't understand, that Section 8 is actually there for a reason. And Section 21, although it's called no fault eviction, I don't think I've ever known a landlord evict a tenant for no fault, for no reason.
It's
There's always a reason.
it's
Um,
fascinating. Go on.
yeah, it's just that's easier process to go through.
Yeah,
You know, with an accelerated possession, if the tenant doesn't defend it, you don't even have a court date. It's just done and dusted.
yeah,
Whereas if you have to go through Section 8, you've got to obviously provide evidence and paperwork and all the other stuff that
yeah.
goes with it. So it's really just about getting rid of Section 21. Yes, it's annoying. Yes, it's going to have an impact. But they've actually done, as I hate to say this, they've actually done a really good job at putting in the Section 8 clauses that we need in order for it to work. Obviously, my concern is more the courts having the capacity.
That's a podcast for another day.
Yeah, that's an entire podcast in itself. But is the industry heading in the right direction? No, I don't think it is. My opinion on the renters' rights bill is scrap it. We don't need it.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with the legislation that we've currently got. All we need is more crackdown on the bad things that are happening. I know they're obviously saying about bringing in landlord ombudsmans and bringing in private rented databases. But if you take my area in Oxfordshire, Oxford City Council have selective licensing. So every rental property under Oxford City Council has to have a license, which means they're being checked, they're being monitored. But now they're going to have to join these two schemes as well. And you're kind of thinking, how many times do we want to poke landlords and say, yeah, keep giving me all this information? And the good landlords are the ones that will sign up for that. The ones that are actually meeting the requirements and doing what they're supposed to be doing and providing good, safe, reasonable properties are the ones that will sign up and pay. The ones that have got 25 people living in one room with no fire safety and, no mold, damp, all the other stuff, they're not going to register. So you've still got the problem of trying to find them, which is the issue we've got now. So I think the money would be better spent if it was focused on that side of it and making sure that the bad landlords are held to account.
Yeah. And
But that's just my two pence worth.
no, and regulation of property agents, that seems to be kicked into the long grass again, doesn't it? So who knows where we'll end up with that.
Yeah. I mean, I hope that doesn't come in, because that means I have to actually get qualified.
Okay, so on the back of that, what would your advice be for any agents that are watching today who might be feeling a little bit overwhelmed with all these upcoming changes, bearing in mind they've all got businesses to run as well, teams to manage, landlords to keep happy, and then to totally unlearn everything that they've probably ever learned and relearn it all again? Have you got any top tips from Sarah Evans about how to do that? Run for the hills.
Probably my two tips that will come in together is educate yourself, but take small steps. So you don't have to. I mean, I'm sad, and I did sit and read the legislation, with the Housing Act on one screen and the changes on the other screen and how they work. But that's because I'm a little sad. Um, but if you
Dedicated and enthusiastic and passionate. There you go.
Let's go with that. Yeah, sounds much better. But if you haven't got the time to do that, you just need to be taking small steps. Maybe do one thing a day. So learn something every day about the bill, whether that be about the pet side or the Section 21 side or the rent increase, or whatever it is. And then when you're looking at your business again, take it in small steps, because there is a lot of change coming that will have a huge impact on agent businesses.
Yeah. I think you're spot on. I mean, looking at what you just said about picking one thing, I think what you then could do is when you look at that element of the bill, look at the process that element's going to affect, and then look at how you can adapt that. Because I think if you try and unpack your whole process end to end in one go, your head will explode. I mean, doing what I do now, and that's part of what I do with agents, is I go in and I look at their processes, and I'm in there for a snapshot in time. And that is the biggest thing, is trying to unpack it all in a short space of time. So yeah, I think, like, for example, looking at the rent in advance. I mean, another key one for me would be get the bill out, get your tenancy agreement out, and look at what's going to apply once the legislation comes in and what's not going to apply, because you're going to need to know that to manage those tenancies. And I think that's going to be vitally important to ensure that all your team do as well, because it's only going to take someone saying one thing wrong once that, potentially the fallout from that could be astronomical.
Could be huge. Yeah. And that's the thing. The fines for these breaches are enormous.
Well, I'm still trying to get my head around all the breaches in terms of the enforcement side of things, because the enforcement, they're going to double it up, aren't they? So the rent repayment orders are going to be 2 years instead of one. And it's going to be for other things as well, that are not that are not there right now. And having worked in that space for a period of time, I know, and it's not scaremongering because I've seen it with my own eyes, how particular local authorities are right now in terms of chasing people down and finding them, because they keep the money. And we know councils are going bankrupt. We know councils haven't got money. Easy targets.
When you're talking £7,000 for a first offence, that's not a small amount of money
for a small business.
And I guess the other thing, landlords in Oxfordshire probably have it slightly better because their rents are higher. But if you look up north and you're looking at an average rent of £600 a month, and then you take all their costs and mortgages and all the other stuff into it, and they're probably making, I don't know, a few £1,000s a year in profit. And then they've got to pay a £7,000 fine for one breach, which could be something really, really pathetic. That's like a few years worth of their profit wiped out. So you really, really do have to be on the ball for the regular.
And I know with HMOs, they never just fine you for one thing.
No.
It'll be, not displaying the license. Then there'll be 3 or 4 other things they've spotted, and each one's a fine. So it's. I don't want to depress you guys out there watching this right now, but just like I say, you can't eat an elephant in one go. Small bites.
Small bites. Yeah.
Okay. So this has been absolutely brilliant. I'm really glad that we've had this chat today. It's clear that you're getting ready for this, and preparation, good communication, and staying ahead is the key for letting agents. So now I just want to reach out to anyone who is watching, because we do want to hear from you as well. So if you're a letting agent or a landlord who's preparing, we'd like to hear from you about what you're doing. What are your biggest concerns or challenges? And do you feel confident about how this is all going to shake out? I would also like to reach out to suppliers, because this is one of the things, and I don't know what you think about this, Sarah, is some are making noises about what they're planning to do or how they're planning to support the agents out there. But some of them are being very, very quiet. And I would really just like some of you out there, suppliers, to reach out to me, and maybe we can get you on and you can tell us what plans you're making to support agents with this massive shift in how we're all going to be doing things in the future, in the new world. Is it New World Order they call it, don't they? New World Order. Anyway, Sarah, before we go, where can people contact you and learn about Cardea Lettings as well? If you want a little sort of shameless plug now about you, and please, how can people get in touch with you? What's the best way? I mean, you said you're all over social media, but
yeah, I am all over social media, so you can either find it under my name, Sarah Evans, or Cardea Lettings. I'm on Facebook, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram, pretty much any social media platform
do you do TikTok yet? Have you started TikTok?
No, we haven't gone that far yet. That's next. That's next.
I'll be looking forward
But
to
yeah,
it.
so you can also find me on my website, cardealettings.co.uk.
Fabulous. I will drop all those links in the sort of posty bit that I do with this video. That's it for today. Thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll obviously see you next time on Renters' Rights Ready. Thanks a lot. Don't stop it from videoing now. There it is.